Hey guys, what is going on today? Bojo here, back with another one of my NHL prediction videos, where today I'm going to be doing my personal predictions for the 2017 Stanley Cup playoffs to see who I think will become this year's Stanley Cup champion. So if you guys missed the previous video that I did where we went into NHL 17 and did a playoff simulation for who EA Sports thinks is going to win this year's Stanley Cup, the link for that is definitely in the description down below. Very interesting results in that simulation, to say the least, but I think this one, for my personal one, should be very interesting. So obviously we're going to be using NHL.com and NHL's bracket challenge, as we have all the matchups right here. Obviously you can choose your team, choose the amount of games, and then it will reconfigure itself to get your best possible matchups in the second round, conference finals, Stanley Cup final. If you used bracket challenge before, you know how this basically works. So let me go over the seedings in each conference really quickly for those who don't know, because the bracket challenge did open up today, so the standings and the rankings were finally official. We'll start in the East. Montreal first seed, New York Rangers first wildcard team, Ottawa Senators second seed, third seed Boston Bruins. First seed, Washington Capitals, President's Trophy winning, #1 seed throughout the entire playoffs, Washington Capitals. Second wildcard team, Toronto Maple Leafs. Second seed, Pittsburgh Penguins. And the third seed, Columbus Blue Jackets. In the West, first seed, Chicago Blackhawks. First wildcard team, Nashville Predators. Minnesota Wild, second seed. Third seed, St. Louis Blues. First seed, Anaheim Ducks. Second wildcard team, Calgary Flames. And then actually I think it's the other way around for Nashville and Calgary. And then second seed Edmonton and third seed San Jose. So as I said, a bunch of interesting matchups here in the first round. So I'm going to get some of the easier matchups that I can definitely predict out of the way first. And we're going to go to the Eastern Conference first. And we're going to start with Washington and Toronto. Now, when I look at this series, I see a mirror image to last year's series when Washington had to play Philadelphia. Basically, it's almost the exact same scenario this year as it was last year, where Washington was the President's Trophy winning team for the second year in a row, and they have to play the second wildcard team. Last year was Philadelphia, this year is Toronto. Toronto and Philly this year, Philly of last year and Toronto of this year have very, very similar attributes, I guess you could say, for each team. Both had a rookie who was going absolutely insane. Granted, the Maple Leafs have 5 of them, but still, when you talk about one rookie in particular, you talk about Austin Matthews this year for the Leafs, you talk about Shane Gostisbehere last year for the Philadelphia Flyers. We know the defensive struggles of both Philly and Toronto of this year and last year weren't all too great. Now, Toronto, on the other hand, has Frederik Andersen coming off of an injury in that next to last game of the season, giving him some extra rest so that he is ready for this game. And I think this series is going to... Obviously, I'm going to pick the Washington Capitals, but once again, like Philly last year, I will not be surprised if the Maple Leafs can win at least 1 or 2 games, because one, either Austin Matthews goes absolutely ham and the rookies go ham on the Capitals. They grind and chip those players away to get some goals, or Frederik Andersen stands on his head and steals the Maple Leafs 1 game or 2, which is exactly what Michael Neuvirth did last year for the Flyers when they played the Caps. He stood on his head 2 games. Flyers push it to a game 6. But when you're looking at Washington, I mean, they have the full package. They have one of the best power plays. They have Ovechkin. They have Backstrom. They have Brandon Holtby in net. There's nothing more you could ask for a Washington Capitals team. They went out. They acquired Kevin Shattenkirk at the trade deadline. They did everything that Washington possibly could to make their team even better, because Washington wants to win the Cup. And if they don't do it this year, I don't think they're going to have a shot to do it anytime soon after this year, because I don't see Washington getting any more better than they are right now. They're one of the best teams. They are the best team in the NHL, and they have to get it done this year. So with that being said, I'm going to pick Washington. If I had to pick games, since apparently we don't do games anymore, I will pick 5. I'll pick 5. I say the Leafs steal at least 1 game in there. Maybe like in game 3 or 4 when it's in the ACC, they'll have their fans revved up. They'll probably be able to steal 1 game in there. But I think Washington will take this series in 5 games. I want to take a look at Montreal versus the New York Rangers. So when you look at this matchup, you immediately look at the goaltending duel. You got Carey Price versus Henrik Lundqvist. This is probably the best goaltender matchup you have here in the first round. Now, it's funny seeing the Rangers as a wild card team because we know the Rangers are not supposed to be a wild card team. They could arguably be the second seed, or possibly even if the Capitals didn't have that great of a season, they could be the first seed in the Metropolitan Division because they were still pretty good this year, 48, 28, and 6. It's a decent record. It's almost as good as the Montreal Canadiens. I think Canadiens have one more point better than they do than the Rangers. Defensively and offensively minded, I have to give it to the Rangers a bit because I think they have a little bit more depth on offense than the Montreal Canadiens do. Granted, Montreal has had some very surprising players get some interesting totals this year. I mean, Alexander Radulov was a blessing for the Canadiens. Obviously, he's held back his temper this year and has had a really good season. Paul Byron, 20-goal scorer Paul Byron this year, has done incredible things. Obviously, Brendan Gallagher didn't have the season he wanted as he was hurt for most of it. Pacioretty had one hell of a year. Galchenyuk has been playing much better. Shea Weber will be coming back from an injury, so he'll bring that defensive studliness back to the Montreal Canadiens defensive front, which is a little bit shaky, but I think it still should be pretty good. As for the New York Rangers, it's basically stayed the same. We know who the Rangers are. They are running out of time. Making the playoffs, they've been giving away all these assets to other teams. They're running out of time to get the job done. Because if they continue to make the playoffs, they continue to expend their assets, what is going to be left of this Rangers team in like 2 to 3 years when they lose all these good players and they have nothing left in the system? I want to give it to the New York Rangers just because of their depth. And I think this series has the possibility of going to 7 games just because of the fact that one game Carey Price could steal you a game. One game Henrik Lundqvist could steal you a game. The goaltender duel in this series has the potential to go back and forth as many times as possible. But I'm going to give it to the New York Rangers. I think they have a little bit more depth goal scoring available on their roster than do the Canadiens. But I say this series goes to 7 games. And I think the Rangers will come out on top. Okay, so the next series I want to touch on, I think, will be Ottawa and Boston. Now, I think this one here is where you'll call it an upset, even though I really don't consider the Montreal-New York Rangers series, even though the Rangers will be the wild card team. I don't really consider that as an upset because I think those two teams are very evenly matched. We know Boston is a very good power play team, and Ottawa is not a very good power play team, as you can see right there. Special teams is going to be a huge difference in this series between Ottawa and Boston. Look at the power play percentage difference. 16% for Ottawa, 21% for Boston. 85% penalty kill for the Bruins is crazy good. Under 80% penalty killing for the Ottawa Senators. If Ottawa can stay disciplined, well, then you can rely on, hopefully, your star players to get it done. You need Mark Stone, you need Mike Hoffman, you need Bobby Ryan to show up in the playoffs for once in his life. You need Erik Karlsson to once again quarterback that entire offense. All the play, usually whenever he's out on the ice, has to go through Erik Karlsson and needs to get the job done. As for Boston, you just have to keep playing the way you are playing and play the way Boston plays in the playoffs. They have to get in the heads of their opponents. They have to grind them down because that's what Boston playoff hockey is all about. And honestly, Boston, I really feel like should not be worried in this series whatsoever. I really think they have the stuff to take down the Ottawa Senators in this series without any question. And I think this series will be done in 6 games, as I think the Boston Bruins will take out the Ottawa Senators in 6 games, just because I think Ottawa is just going to struggle way too much on the special teams side of things, where I think the stars of the Boston Bruins, they're a very good defensive team. Patrice Bergeron, Brad Marchand, Pasternak, I think we'll be able to get it done offensively for them. Still, their defense, too, has some very good studs in it. I think Ottawa will steal a game or 2 in there, but 6 games is what I'm saying for the Bruins to take care of Ottawa. Okay, so the next series I want to talk about is we'll finish up the last one in the Eastern Conference, then we'll move over to the West and do everything. I guess I did the entire Eastern Conference first, but I want to talk about this series. Pittsburgh versus Columbus. Now, if you go back, 3 years ago to 2014, Pittsburgh dealt with the Blue Jackets in 6 games. Columbus has had a very exciting year, to say the least. You've seen the stars like Cam Atkinson come out of absolutely nowhere. You've seen Alexander Wedberg and Brandon Saad do really great things for the Blue Jackets. You see a guy like Sam Gagner, one of the better free agent signings this year for the Columbus Blue Jackets, play a lot better. Zach Werenski, the rookie phenom in the Calder race, obviously was not going to beat the likes of Auston Matthews and rookies like that, but still, probably the best rookie defenseman this year came off the back of Zach Werenski. And you also have a guy like Sergei Bobrovsky in that, who is probably a Vezina Trophy candidate this year. And the Columbus Blue Jackets have very much succeeded from all the good that has come this year. Now, as we look at Pittsburgh, the defending Stanley Cup champions are not looking all too good coming into the series. Granted, it's hard to pick against Sidney Crosby and the Penguins in the playoffs, but they're hurt. Like, they're really, really hurt. They're not gonna have Chris Letang. They say Evgeny Malkin will be back for game number 1. Hopefully he should. Hagelin and Kunitz are out with injuries. This Pittsburgh team is injury riddled. For once again, going into last year, they had injuries coming into the playoffs last year, and this year they have injuries once again. But looking on last year, they fought through all those injuries. However, this year, I think those injuries might be a little bit too much for them to handle. I think Bobrovsky has the edge over Matt Murray in this series just because of his regular season play. Pittsburgh's power play, as you guys can see here, is deadly. Pittsburgh can score goals. It's hard to stop Sidney Crosby in the playoffs when he gets it going for sure. But I think the Blue Jackets will finally win their first playoff series this year. And I'm not picking against the Penguins just because I'm a Flyers fan. I seriously do think the Blue Jackets have a serious chance to beat the Penguins in this series. I'm going to say 6. I'll say 6 games for the Columbus Blue Jackets. They beat the Pittsburgh Penguins. I'll say Columbus gets a good, nice early lead, maybe a 2-0 or maybe even a 3-0 series lead. Pittsburgh will really start to play their asses off again, get back into this series because, Crosby will just have one of those games where he'll put the entire team on his back and make everybody around him better, like Connor Sheary, Jake Gensel, players all like that Pittsburgh has. Turn mediocre players into stars. Same thing like the Blackhawks love doing, turning mediocre players into stars. And they'll try to get back in this series, but I really do think that the injuries are going to be too much for Pittsburgh. And the fact that because of these injuries to their defensive core especially, I think they have way too many veteran players on their defense. Ron Hainsey, Mark Streit, those are 2 of your veteran defenders. I mean, Trevor Daley too. I think Pittsburgh has way too many veteran, slow-moving defenders that I think Columbus will just be able to easily beat them. 6 games, Columbus wins their first playoff series and moves on to round number 2. All right, so let's move over to the West. We'll start from the top, Chicago versus Nashville. This one, honestly, should not be a hard decision for me to make right here, where I say it year after year after year. Don't pick against the Hawks in the playoffs. It's almost as simple as that. You can't pick against the Chicago Blackhawks in the playoffs when they continue to play like this. You know what Patrick Kane can do in the playoffs. You know what Artemi Panarin can do. You know what Jonathan Toews can do. Granted, they're going to be without Armin Niisalma for a bit, but still, Chicago has depth players like crazy on this team. They have the depth on defense. They got Johnny Oduya back. Corey Crawford can play like his normal Corey Crawford self in the playoffs and not play you either get the Corey Crawford who's not elite in the playoffs, or you get Corey Crawford who is elite in the playoffs. There's 2 signs of Corey Crawford in the playoffs, and if you get that elite Corey Crawford goaltender in the playoffs, it's going to be very, very hard to score goals against him. Now, granted, Nashville has been hot. They got hot almost after the trade deadline, then they really kind of dipped afterwards. Pekka Rinne was not playing all too great near the back end of the season. On the other hand, Philip Forsberg was heating up like a volcano, was scoring goals like crazy, and PK Subban has really been a huge help for this team as well on both their power play and their penalty kill, which Nashville does have the special teams advantage, it seems, but even though they have the advantage on power play, you have to worry about Kane Taves, Panarin on the power play. I will go with my guts and not pick against the Chicago Blackhawks in the playoffs because it's just like you're not supposed to do that. And I say this one gets done in 4. Sweep. Chicago sweeps Nashville. Chicago will sweep Nashville in 4 games. I might not predict many sweeps in this playoffs at all. Honestly, I should have given Toronto versus Washington a sweep. I could have easily given that a sweep, but I'll give Toronto credit that they'll take 1. I don't think Nashville takes 1. I think Chicago sweeps them out in 4 games, and they'll move on to the second round. Okay, so next up, we'll move on to the Minnesota Wild and the St. Louis Blues. Okay, now if you guys watched my trade deadline video, I said watch out for Minnesota because their forward depth is absolutely crazy, and it is good. If you look at Washington from the Eastern Conference side, I think the Minnesota Wild are a team you have to watch out for on the Western Conference side. Now remember what I said as well. If Minnesota manages to not match up with the Chicago Blackhawks in this playoff series, they have a very good chance to make it to the Western Conference Finals or even the Stanley Cup in this instance. I think Minnesota has the depth like crazy on forward. They have some really good defense, and they have Devin Dubnyk, who's honestly a really good elite goaltender. I think Minnesota has everything on paper to beat this series, to win this series from the St. Louis Blues. Going into the playoffs, the St. Louis Blues are one of the, if not the hottest team going into the playoffs off a rip. They have been getting a lot better goaltending from Jake Allen as of late, and even with trading away Kevin Shattenkirk, it seems like Jay Bouwmeester, Alex Pietrangelo, and Colton Parayko have that defensive core on lockdown right now. But in order to win this series, they need Tarasenko. They need Tarasenko to not have the struggles that he had last year when he blew up against Ken Hitchcock and had that argument on the bench. They need a crazy Russian sniper like Vladimir Tarasenko to just go off in the playoffs. Minnesota, just looking at their team, Minnesota has just so much of a well-rounded team. It's really going to be hard for a St. Louis Blues team to really crack that circle. So the Blues probably will steal a couple games here and there, but as for the results, if my mouse would love to work, thank you, I'm going to take the Wild in that series, and I'm going to pick that series in 6. I'll take that series in 6. Okay, so the next matchup we're going to look at here is the Anaheim Ducks and the Calgary Flames. Now, something interesting I read up on between this series is that Calgary has had the most 1-goal victories this year. And that actually does not bode well for teams in the playoffs. If you are going to win 1-goal games in the playoffs, you need to make sure that your defensive core, bar none, the best defense you could ever put together in the history of humankind. I don't know if Mark Giordano and Dougie Hamilton are going to be able to help Calgary have this shutdown defensive mentality to stop an offense like Anaheim has. You have Ryan Getzlaf, Kessler, Perry, Silverberg, Raquel. I think Anaheim is way too good of an offensive team that does struggle sometimes. They are very hot and cold. Some games you have Ryan Getzlaf and Corey Perry where they don't show up, and then you have somebody else show up. Other games, nobody shows up for Anaheim. And honestly, Anaheim is a very good defensive team as well. Granted, Anaheim is going to be without Cam Fowler, I think, for another 3 or 4 weeks, I want to say. I would know this because I had him in fantasy, and losing him really sucked. Anyway, besides the point, even though Cam Fowler, losing him is going to be a little bit of a hurt, especially for their offensive and power play prowess that the Anaheim Ducks have, I think Anaheim and the fact that Calgary is not a team to shut a team like Anaheim down defensively and win a 1-goal game. You don't have the goalie to do that. Brian Elliott's good, but he's not great enough to steal you 1-goal games night after night after night. You need to outscore a team like the Anaheim Ducks if you want to have a chance to win this series. And I don't think Calgary will be able to do so. Once again, it's always going to be nice to see like Johnny Hockey, Sean Monahan, Mikael Backlund, Sam Bennett, players like that for Calgary to grind, and Matthew Tkachuk as well. Players like that to grind and chip away at the Anaheim Ducks, but I don't see Calgary as that entire defensive team to shut down Anaheim, win those one-goal games that they have been able to do throughout the entire year. And also, I think they've gone 1-4 against Anaheim this entire year. They've had some very bad luck against the Ducks the entire year. So I think that bad luck will continue. Anaheim will win that series in 5 games. They will overpower Calgary's defensive-minded strategies, and they will outscore Calgary by all heck. John Gibson will get back into that groove, which he has been in the past little bits. John Gibson looks ready to go. Anaheim moves on to round number 2. All right, and that leads us to our final series here in the first round, Edmonton versus the San Jose Sharks. The Edmonton Oilers, on the back of Connor McJesus, have made it into the playoffs as a second seed of all things. Connor McDavid single-handedly pretty much dragged the Oilers into the playoffs with him. And they have to go up against a very veteran San Jose Sharks team that is looking to hopefully make it back to that Stanley Cup Finals for the second year in a row. Now, if we look at each team respectively, it looks like Edmonton definitely has the offensive advantage for sure in this series. Edmonton is quick. Edmonton knows how to score goals. And I think that's how they're going to have to win games. Is they are, as stupid as it sounds, they're going to have to outscore their opponents, and they're going to have to outscore their opponents like all hell if they want to be able to do that. Because Edmonton's defense is, their defense is a little bit sketchy. Still, Adam Larson, Chris Russell, Sekera, they've been doing a very good job on defense nonetheless. Cam Talbot, as I mentioned during my Community Team of the Year voting, Cam Talbot has had a very good year, a very underrated year for goaltending as well. So they give the statistical advantage to Edmonton in this series, but it's hard to go against a San Jose Sharks veteran squad that has experience in the playoffs. Although they don't ever get to the big dance all that often, the San Jose Sharks team has a ton of playoff experience, and that's where Edmonton lacks. Edmonton's kind of rookie-ish team doesn't have that playoff experience at all, other than a couple players, Milan Lucic, Patrick Maroon, I guess. I think it was in the playoffs with the Ducks at one point. Not many players on Edmonton do have that playoff experience that come with it. This will be their very first playoff run for a bunch of players on Edmonton. When you look at San Jose, on the other hand, you could pretty much go throughout their entire roster, and they have made the playoffs at some point. However, San Jose is looking a little bit limp coming into the playoffs. You have a lot of injuries to players like Joe Thornton, Logan Couture, and Joe Pavelski, I think, even missed a couple games late into the season. So San Jose is kind of limping a lot of their veteran players into the postseason. Not sure how healthy all of those players are going to be. I think they expect all of them to play, but I think a bunch of them are not going to be at 100% to start this series. So you can actually see Edmonton come away with a couple of victories here at the beginning of this series. But once again, you come to a goaltending duel, and we know what Martin Jones did last year for the San Jose Sharks in net. So I think this will be a very, very exciting series to watch. And I think, like my NHL 17 simulation, I'm going to pick these San Jose Sharks to win that series in 7 games. I think that's going to be, definitely the playoff matchup I'm most excited about watching. I really want to see Edmonton do well, but I think San Jose will eventually come out on top and win that series in 7 games. I think that series will definitely go to 7, and that is what I think will happen. It's going to be fun to see McDavid play in the playoffs, though, that's for sure. And who knows, maybe he could really just put the team, continue to drag this Edmonton Oilers team along and see if they could get farther into the playoffs. But I think one person isn't alone enough to win you games in the playoffs. You need a full team effort. And if McDavid's the only person doing anything on the Oilers, it's going to be hard for them to win the series. So that's why I think San Jose will be able to come out on top. All right, so now as we move into the second round here, I'm going to go a little bit quicker on some of these picks. You got the New York Rangers and the Boston Bruins. I have to give it to the New York Rangers to beat the Boston Bruins. I would say that series would go to 6. I think the Rangers would make it to the conference finals. As a wildcard team, they shouldn't be a wildcard team, but I think the New York Rangers will beat the Boston Bruins if they match up in 6 games to make it to the conference finals. Washington versus Columbus. Once again, statistical matchup. Washington beats Columbus in every single sort of aspect in this. I think Columbus will be a little bit puckered out from that series with the Pittsburgh Penguins, even though they would have to go from dealing with Malkin and Crosby to now dealing with Ovechkin and Backstrom and all the other studs on Washington. I think Washington has the statistical advantage in the series, as you guys show in the stats. I think Washington takes this series over Columbus. Columbus will get their first playoff series victory, but I think that's all they'll be able to get. And Washington will move on to the conference finals. I'll say 6. I think Columbus can take a game or 2 in there, but I still think the Washington Capitals are way too good this year to not get to the conference finals at very least. As we move to the Western Conference, Chicago and Minnesota. What did I say? What did I say in my trade deadline video? And what did I say earlier in this video? Minnesota will be able to make it to the conference finals if they don't match up with the Chicago Blackhawks. 2 years that I can remember, Minnesota has matched up with Chicago twice in the playoffs, and they've lost both times. Well, you know what, Chicago fans? Not this year. Minnesota will beat the Chicago Blackhawks in 7 games in round number 2 of the Western Conference, and they will go on to their conference finals with the Minnesota Wild. They will finally exercise the demons that are the Chicago Blackhawks. They will finally get that playoff series victory over the Hawks, and they will go on to the conference finals to face either the Anaheim Ducks or the San Jose Sharks, which is a very interesting matchup once again. I believe these two played last year, right? Did they play in round number 1? No, San Jose played LA in round number 1. This one's a tough series to pick. Anaheim definitely has a statistical advantage once again. Goalie is a really good matchup. Gibson against Jones. Defensively, pretty good matchup. You would think Cam Fowler would be back maybe by the back end of this series. Maybe. If Fowler's not back by the end of this series, he definitely comes back at the beginning of the next series. I think San Jose would heal up a good bit once again so that they would be ready for this series. San Jose is going to be very, very tired in this playoffs. I think this is another one that could possibly go to 7 games. I think Anaheim might be a little bit more rested than the San Jose Sharks will be. So I'm going to pick the Anaheim Ducks over the Sharks to make it to the Western Conference Finals, which leaves me with 2 very interesting matchups in both the East and the West. In the East, I have the New York Rangers up against the Washington Capitals in the East, and then in the West, I have the Minnesota Wild up against the Anaheim Ducks in the West. So, Anaheim versus Minnesota, you got a 1 and a 2 seed, and then Washington versus New York Rangers, you have a wild card seed, and you have the first seed. Once again, you have Holtby versus Lundqvist. Defensively, they're very equally matched up. I would say Washington maybe has a little bit of an edge. Statistically, Washington is better. I think Washington makes it to the Stanley Cup Finals. I really do. I don't think the New York Rangers will be able to get it done against a Washington Capitals team. I'm pretty sure Washington has had the New York Rangers number throughout the entire regular season. So the Washington Capitals will make it to the Stanley Cup Finals to face either the Minnesota Wild or the Anaheim Ducks. Once again, I predicted this matchup at the trade deadline, and honestly, this is the matchup I really want to see. 2 teams that made really, really interesting plays at the trade deadline. I really do think they can go all the way, and this is the matchup I really want to see the most. I think Anaheim could give Minnesota a run for their money. I think that could go to 6 or 7 games as well, but I want to say that the Minnesota Wild will hopefully come out on top to go to the Stanley Cup Finals. And honestly, this is the matchup I really want to see. I want to see the Minnesota Wild. I want to see the depth, forwardness, the really good shutdown D core of the Minnesota Wild, and hopefully the stellar play of Devan Dubnyk go up against a high-powered offense like Ovechkin, Backstrom, Oshie, Kuznetsov, all those players on the Washington Capitals. A really good, balanced, rounded defensive core of the Washington Capitals. and a stellar goaltender in Braden Holtby go up against each other. I think those games could either be really defensive or really offensive on account of what both teams would be able to bring to the table. So who do I think comes out on top? I think I picked them last year. I'm picking them again. Washington, I think this is your year to take the Stanley Cup, take the Stanley Cup champions. You have to win. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You have to win the cup this year. You had to win it last year. You come back, pretty much replicate the season you had last year. No screwing around this time. You may not play the Pittsburgh Penguins. You're still going to have to... You have a very easy first-round opponent in the Leafs. I think they definitely get out of the first round. I think they could get by either Columbus or Pittsburgh, especially considering if Pittsburgh is still going to be fairly injury-riddled into the second round, or if Columbus is going to be not that big of a challenge for the Caps. You could probably get by either the Rangers or anybody in that top bracket, I would think, once again. And I think Washington does have a very easy, not so easy, but a very not tough road to the Stanley Cup Finals. Other than the New York Rangers, who I think would be able to give them a pretty difficult time in the playoffs. Same thing with maybe Montreal. I think they could easily handle Ottawa or Boston on that bottom bracket. And Washington will be able to get to the Stanley Cup Finals. Minnesota, on the other hand, does have a very hard road to the Stanley Cup Finals. They'll have to face a Blues team, which we know is good. They have to exercise their demons of beating the Hawks in the second round, and then they have to fight. They have to. I don't think they're going to face Calgary. Then they either have to play Anaheim, San Jose, or Edmonton in the conference finals if they manage to get there. Either which, all three of those teams are going to be a very tough opponent for the Minnesota Wild. But I do think that they will get to the Stanley Cup Finals. That series could go either way. I think it could go to 7 games, honestly. Because, like I said, it could be either really offensive games, really defensive games. How many goals will be scored in the Stanley Cup Final? I will say it will be... how many goals do I want to say will be scored in this series? I'm going to go with 29 goals will be scored in that series. So, I'll hit next. Oh, there we go. That's where the games are at. You have to click on the thing. So as I mentioned, Chicago or Nashville, I say a sweep. This one goes to, how many did I say this one? I think, did I say 6? 6 or 7? I think I said 6. I think I said 6 for that. 5 games for Anaheim over Calgary. This one goes to 7. Montreal and New York Rangers, that one goes to 7. I think Boston takes that one 6. Washington in 5. And then Columbus over Pittsburgh in 6. That's what my bracket looks like, guys. I have the Washington Capitals winning the Stanley Cup. Let me know what you guys think if you guys want to join my bracket challenge as well. It is under the... oh, there we go. Okay, there we go. Took a little bit of time to load, but there is my bracket. So, I think the Washington Capitals will win the bracket. If you guys want to join in on my bracket, I might have a prize for the person who comes the closest to predicting it. I'll leave a link for it down in the description, but let me know what you guys thought of my bracket. Who do you think is going to win the Stanley Cup championship this year? Who's going to win the cup? What do you guys think of my bracket? Do you agree or disagree with some of my choices? Let me know down below. Other than that, thank you guys for watching. If you did enjoy, leave a like, comment, subscribe as always. And time to enjoy some playoff hockey, even though my Flyers will be on the outside looking in. Playoff hockey is always exciting to watch. So, thank you guys for watching. See you next time. Enjoy some playoffs.